Cannabis Marketing Live. I'm your host, Jake Litke, the CEO of MediaJel. And today we have Ted Montanus. Ted has a long career in the advertising industry, which we'll talk a little bit more about. And today we're going to talk about geotargeting and how you can use geospatial information, both from the past and the present, to drive effective campaigns and good conversions. So let's start off with a brief introduction here for Ted. Ted has actually recently joined MediaJel late last year. We're super excited to have him. Been working with Ted for many years now. He comes from the supply side. He helped us architect the original ability that we had to even serve ads on mainstream inventory, which took a lot of effort. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But Ted, maybe you can give us just a quick background on your history in the advertising space and how you ended up here in the regulated cannabis industry.
Yeah, I started my career on the television side at Dish Network and then DirecTV before moving over to digital. Spent some time with the data company, all within advertising in New York City, and then I joined a large independent ad tech company. And our relationship started, I guess, on a boat, in Cannes, and came to myself about, hey, would you be open to accepting cannabis advertisers? And at the time, it was a good match for us because we were somewhat newer to the U.S., looking for an advantage, and we were an independent company, not U.S. publicly traded, and thought it would be a little bit easier when we first thought about it, but it did take some years, a lot of hand-holding, a lot of meetings with the publishers, and it grew quite quickly too, because everybody now had a place to advertise online, and it wasn't on inventory that nobody had ever heard of. It was mainstream stuff, and now almost 5 years later, it's come quite a long way.
Yeah, it did take a while, as you said, to get people get the publishers on board. Making sure that they understood that we could handle the compliance correctly. We understood the state laws. So let's talk about we're talking about mainstream inventory here, right? And we still run into people every once in a while that don't think that they can run ads on CNN or whatnot, and we've definitely solved that issue at this point. And so I want to start off with some basic definitions. I think most people that have done some sort of advertising understand the word geofence, basically, right? Okay, we're gonna build a border around an area, and we're gonna serve ads inside of that. I think where people get a little more confused is when we start to talk about what we call geo-framing. And we define geoframe as a combination of geography and a time frame. And so when we talk about a geoframe audience, we're talking about an audience that is based on device behavior in the past, right? And that's usually a couple day look back window. There's a couple days of the data aggregation going through its various stages. But what we do frequently, then the most common thing that a cannabis dispensary wants is we have every dispensary geo-framed in the US. So that means we have the boundaries of that physical location, and we're able to capture device IDs for people that have opted in for advertising, put them into an audience, and then target that audience at the time that you're serving the ad. So we're generally doing two things at the same time. We're taking a geospatial audience of where devices have been in the past, and then we are selectively running ads in a radius around that location. The radius varies by the location. In a rural area, it's going to be larger. In a dense area, it's going to be smaller. But if you take those two pieces and you put them together, you build a pretty powerful data set. And so that's a geofence and a geoframe. And then on top of that, we can then layer in additional audiences. So we can layer in things like demographic, age, income, gender, propensity towards specific activities like concert goers or whatever it may be. It really is a wide open field in terms of geography of what you can choose to do. And people choose to create audiences kind of based on what their brand affinity is. So I'll pause and maybe you can talk about examples of where you've seen this be successful. And I'd also like to talk about some of the experiences you've had outside of the cannabis space and the way that large advertisers leverage this data.
Yeah, because coming into this, and thinking about, this is like a topic. A lot of the time we see, advertisers, and I've had experience with advertisers where they pick one thing and they think that that's what it's for, and they focus on, how to utilize it that way. Like the most common one is, a conference. I want to get everybody there. I'm doing B2B. I want to capture everybody. And with, anything in the geo, let's call it realm, there's so many different ways that you can use it on a macro level and a micro level, if you really design it well. So it does work for a lot of brands, especially when you bring in propensity to it. And also, just like with any targeting, it's, one piece of the puzzle. It's not going to be the end all, because just like with first party, second party, third, contextual, geo, they all have things that they excel in, and then they all have their weaknesses too. But when geo, started to first come out, mobile advertising was growing. I was actually at a mobile company at the time, and it was, very interesting. A lot of like big advertisers were getting into it, especially, and it's kind of put us on the path to retail, which is now the hottest topic, is retail marketing. But I did work on like a couple interesting campaigns that are, some of the more, from the past that are, proud of and are really interesting. And one particular comes to mind, which was, when we first started to get, Maid's mobile IDs and the tracking, and was for Purdue chicken, and their whole campaign. Which one of the linear things about using any of these targeting is that it has to be linked with everything else. It's like if you just focus on the wheels or the seats or the engine, like there's still a lot of other components to the car that all have to be working in sync. So in this case, it was the creative that was done first, or the concept of what the advertiser wanted to do. So Purdue Chicken, it was a summer campaign. They had two targets. They wanted the household decision maker for food shopping, as well as converting consumers to utilize chicken products for outside grilling, summer activities. And our offer to them was tailgating, switching from burgers and dogs to chicken. Obviously it's healthier. That was part of their pitch. So we, in the early days, we, geo fenced around all of the baseball stadiums and other large sporting events that were going, to see the devices coming into there and out, ones that have been in there in the past. So, we knew maybe that they went to the games. Maybe there was consistent ones. We also did state parks that had grilling, camping grounds, to try to, target those people there. Because a lot of time when you're camping, you come, then maybe you'll go out, bring your food or get it. Like we wanted to capture those ahead of time as well. So then we linked it with travel sites, as for the broader market too. So it was all kind of going into one storyline. And at the time, rich media was growing too. So the ad unit itself would either swipe through, or you could click, and it was like tailgating chicken recipes. And then from there, on the location based, taking one step further, it would tell you where you could go and buy those products. So the certain supermarkets too. So then we knew that, to help the first target, which was the household decision maker on food buying. This is a very successful campaign that we ran from May to September, changing the creative in and out. But it was one of the first ones I had worked on with any sort of geo-targeting. The next, we took the similar concept for I still think one of the most interesting advertiser initiatives too, because outside of cannabis, in the more general market, like they can do things like this. They're not tied to 280E. They can do more brandings, and this company in particular definitely has a lot of money. So their campaign was awareness based, but the focus of the campaign was be an engineer, and it was for Exxon Mobil. They proposed, kind of a challenger creative that said, we are in threat of not having enough engineers. We're not going to have enough people to design and build buildings and bridges and infrastructure, or computer engineers. Like, we need that, education. We need people to become that. Obviously, and then everything is branded ExxonMobil. What we did was, with the budget, we wanted to do a localized thing. We couldn't target, obviously, children, people under 18. So, but it did blend with college seniors and people in college. So we looked up the top 25 engineering schools in the country. We found on their sites when they were doing career fairs and career days. So that's when we would do the framing. And we would target the students there, hopefully, making a decision on their major and what they wanted to do. And we focused more on, at the time, the Big Ten schools, which, Purdue, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio State, Indiana, they had some of the better engineering schools. And that was also, a great success. But we use geoframing, geotargeting in different ways to share a particular message.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. We've done some interesting, I'll circle back to some cannabis examples that we've done. I think one of the more interesting ones we did in Las Vegas, right? And this is where we used time and people's place in a pretty creative way. So we created an audience that was national. So it was anyone who had been in a dispensary in the last 6 months. And then we created a geofence around in and around the Las Vegas airport. And I don't remember the numbers, but there's actually a shockingly large amount of people that land in Vegas, and their very first thing they do is go to a dispensary, like right off the plane, right? So yeah.
Yeah, it's legal now here in Connecticut, but yeah, at the time.
Yeah, so we took a national audience of people that have been in dispensaries, but people that did not live in Nevada or Las Vegas specifically, right? Because the particular campaign was just for tourists. And so we said, okay, these are people that we know have been in dispensaries in the past 6 months. And then we served ads basically just in the Las Vegas airport. So anyone that is landing, they're looking at their phone, they're checking the weather, they're getting directions, whatever it is. These ads are showing up on their phone. And it was an ad that was specifically not for locals. And then it was directing them to a local dispensary, right? And that's, I think, a good example of showing how you can use past behavior for, past behavior somewhere else for local activation.
Yeah, yeah. And one thing for, in cannabis too, I mean, it's still fragmented, there's nothing that's like truly national. But if you're, operating in a few different states, each state is different. The culture is different. The people are different. The topography is different. The sports, everything is different. But let's say, you're operating in, the 3Ms, Michigan, Massachusetts, maybe Missouri, and you want to add maybe Colorado or something in there. Like, each of those consumers are going to be different. Their habits are going to be different. Their interests are going to be different. So if you look at it like on a macro level of the types of profiles, of the types of people that are the majority that live in those states, what they like, what they do for work, then you can start to build, more of that propensity model. And then you can go a further layer deeper too, if you're this brand, but you want to make your product successful, move off the shelves in those specific states. The difficult part is that you have to have the creative also align with the messaging for that community. But then you end up learning more about the community and what they're into. Like, we just saw this recently with a case where there was in California, it was a dispensary that had, I think it was 7, 8 locations, 6 kind of in a concentrated area, 3 particularly very close. But looking at the behavioral and demographics of the, geo area around each of those locations, they were vastly different in their interests, their careers, their cultural ethnic background was very different, even though they were very close. So you have to have messaging that speaks to each one of those 3, but you learn over time in those areas, in those communities, how to better market to those specific people, because what one area likes, another one doesn't. It's like, if you're a brand and you're advertising in Michigan and Ohio coming online too, like, your colors of, blue and gold aren't going to work in Ohio. You have to be conscious of that, like on a macro level of location, and then learn about the different habits in there. And it can also be used too as the cannabis business grows and, more and more dispensaries open up. There's more chain dispensaries. And this is something that right when geo-targeting came out and propensity was, somewhat of a new thing in digital. And I think it was, like Walgreens, but I know that Lowe's and Home Depot got into this very early, where they'd look at it as more of a, attrition of, who to take out, not who to target. Because, if you've ever lived in a city or, you've been a renter, so you move quite frequently, you're going to go to, the hardware store that's closest to you. You don't have, a brand loyalty to Home Depot or Lowe's. And especially at the time, and as a side thing, we talk a lot, recently about GameStop, but GameStop was one of the first companies to come out with a very, very sophisticated CRM and loyalty program. They actually speak on that now. That's what made them successful in the early days. And at this time, those stores realized that, like, yeah, if your office is here, we see your device here, and your home is here, and we know maybe on lat long, we can see it based on certain hours of the day, and you're close to a Lowe's. And if I'm Home Depot, I was like, I don't want to serve an impression of that person because they're not on my path to purchase physically. So it's not, quite worth it. If they move, we'd rather focus on the people that are closer to it. It's the same with like a CVS or Walgreens. Like you'll have both loyalty cards, but you go to the one that's more convenient. So maybe you want to target somebody for Walgreens when they're at work, they got to go pick up a prescription, but on the home hours and things, you might not want to do that because they're closer to a CVS.
Yeah. Yeah, we've done some, actually we did some stuff with Home Depot and Lowe's in the past, and there are some interesting demographic differences, right? So, and you've got there's a lot of places where Lowe's is right across the street from Home Depot in the suburbs. And Lowe's tends to have a demographic that skews higher income and more female. And Home Depot is the opposite, right? So, but that's where you start to use that information in terms of your targeting and personalizing the messaging and for your campaign. And so if you look at, alcohol brands are really good with this regionally. So like Guinness right now in California has like Guinness California cans, right? And if you look at billboards in San Francisco versus LA, you're going to have, like say Bacardi, for example, might have a billboard, but they adapt it to be regionally relevant, right? So they'll use catchphrases and local terminology for that region. You can do the same thing with a digital campaign, but you're no longer just bisecting people by geography, you're looking at their individual behavior. And so if you go back to what you were saying around colleges, right? Let's say you've got a big conference game, and you've got two rival schools. You can run the same exact campaign to the entire stadium full of people if you want to do that. But if you know what school they're coming from, then you serve them the different creative, right? With a different color scheme or the different catchphrase or whatever it is. And you can do that in pretty good detail around any propensity that you can come up with, whether it is gender, political, income, sports. And by understanding where your audience came from geographically, it allows you to target them in a way that is it really doesn't have anything to do with PII, right? So you don't need to know who they are. You don't need to get their email address. You don't need to have an opt-in necessarily because you're not targeting them as individuals, but you know that their device home is in this area, and then you know all the information about that, right? So you can start to layer in, like with the DemoGraph, where we've got, over 1,000 characteristics for each home. If you know that this audience member comes from a home that matches these particular demographics, you can use that to not just decide when and where you want to serve ads, but what the creative is that is going to be served to that individual.
Yeah, you can also build, a long-term marketing cycle, especially if you're a higher ticket item, based on propensity and geolocation. So if you copy what purchase data does with, like analyzing path to purchase and building lookalike models, like the longest term one of those would be, speaking of Home Depot, one of their higher ticket items, like they don't make as much money and margin of you going and buying, a Milwaukee or DeWalt drill, but you doing either a large project or utilizing them for a large project. And so you can look at certain identifiers that, put somebody on a path to do that. And essentially you could go back all the way to somebody purchasing an engagement ring, and then what puts them on that path to then ultimately becoming a homeowner that they're going to probably want to redo the kitchen or something like that. And you can collect all this data in very, compliant ways, and put those on longer cycles and then build the lookalikes. But you can do something similar with the propensity. You can see that, somebody had been to a concert or a game in the past, and, build that out, or that they visit these places and come up with a storyline of like, they're probably doing this, or they're at this time. It is somewhat granular, but it does have its specific use cases. A good segue into cannabis is looking at, purchases or location, and time spent of, people that are, green thumbs. They're at nurseries, they're, and based on other habits that you pull in and content that they're doing, maybe they are growing their own garden and stuff. They'd be a perfect person to market seeds to.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's the home improvement thing gets back to one of the, and this has been used forever, but one of the more valuable audience segments that is applicable to a lot of businesses is the new mover audience, right? When someone moves, especially if they move cities, they're going to switch a lot of their brand loyalties. That definitely comes into play for a dispensary, even moving across town, because people do tend to go to local dispensaries that are relatively close to them. And the new mover audience has been around for a long time. Everyone has experienced this. When you move, you get all kinds of mail, right? Um, for whatever the local businesses are. And that data still exists, and it's based on the U.S. Postal Service when you change your address, right? That list gets sold and reused. But we now have the ability to do this in a digital format, which because we can see that this device used to live over here and now it lives in a new location. And you can get that information, and you can be more responsive when you're using digital signals, right? Because there's a time delay when you're dealing, well, anything with the postal service is going to be slow. But the ability to get in front of someone who's changed their physical location as quickly as possible is extremely valuable, right? You want to be the first brand that starts to show up to a consumer when they move to a new location, when they're deciding what their local dispensary is going to be.
Yeah, that's a good, and again, it's, just like one component. It's not the end all. We had, use cases too for new dispensaries opening up, and you can, bolster or make that concept work better too by working with somebody that can, put messaging out that either it's opening, or would you be interested in, being a customer at this place. You can do some research analysis also in digital, to get a feel of what the community is. And obviously you can use the, DemoGraph data to understand, the types of, political affinities, or, the makeup of careers in that area too. And it all goes into like that story, but like using geo targeting, it definitely enhances everything else you're going to do, especially if you're a retailer.
Yeah. Some of the other things that you can do with geographic behavior, and the way to think about it is with audiences in general, is you want to kind of think of a central hub and then a snowflake of spokes around it, with those snowflakes being identifiers. And there's a bunch of them, right? It could be you have someone's email address, you have their home address, you have their phone number. Those things can be translated into geographic targeting audiences. So if you've got your CRM list of however many thousand email addresses, that data can be onboarded in a privacy compliant way. So the emails get hashed and encrypted, but they can then be matched to the device IDs that we've been talking about for targeting. And you can break that up within your CRM list. So you can say, okay, these are my regular shoppers. I just want to do retention marketing for this particular audience. And then you can have these are, lapsed or dormant customers, and I want to give them some sort of offer. You can take that data, you can turn it into mobile device identifiers, and then you can serve them digital campaigns wherever they may be. And to clarify, I'm going to try to remember, we do this so often, there's things that I forget that may not be obvious. So I'm going to try to remember those things. These ads can be served on anything with the screen, right? So that's your phone, your tablet, your desktop computer, and including CTV or connected TV. We've got many mainstream channels now that will accept Cannabis ads on TV, which means that you can be serving ads on the living room television. We're not serving ads on the cable networks because those are controlled by the FCC, and basically anything with F in front of it isn't going to work very well with Cannabis. But most people at this point, if you're watching TV on an Amazon Fire Stick or Roku or a smart TV, those things aren't regulated by the federal government. And the channels that you're looking at, whether it's Hulu or Netflix, that's all runs separate from the FCC essentially. So it's not every provider, but there's quite a few of them now. Mainstream providers that are household names like Discovery, MTV, where we can run Cannabis ads, and we can do that in a targeted way by using information that we know about consumers, either the demographic information about households or other identifiers that we have.
Yeah, yeah, and we just like briefly, talked about it in the beginning, but when we talk about the content and the premium content that people can run on, I think it's also important too is like for cannabis brands and retailers or advertisers to understand that like it's not that you're buying CNN or your ESPN or this channel or that like those specific ad formats and those ad units might be owned by a different company, or there might be a holdco that owns that publisher or that section of a multiple content outlets. I mean, the easiest ones that come to mind are Gannett, Hearst, Penske, Condé Nast, but then there's even granular ones that have like specific ad units and formats on those pages, because publishers, which is a whole nother thing, rabbit hole that we can go down in, but a lot of those ads on there aren't necessarily their specific technology on that page. Like a good example is with native, like that's usually a third party. You have Outbrain or Taboola with that. So when people ask for a publisher list, technically it's not accurate. It's a you want a domains list, because you might look at the publisher and say, I don't know who that is. Like I wanted it on premium stuff. Then if you look at their apps or you look at their domains that they have, then you'll start to recognize those as well. Because for that content producer, that publisher is trying to yield the highest return on the eyeballs on their page, which is why the industry as a whole is looking for a new metric outside of Nielsen ratings, and we're moving more towards an attention-driven metric for a currency that media runs on. But it's important to know that because it's the formats and the units that you buy on the page, and when it comes to mobile devices and in CTV as well too, because you have to factor in that it could be LG, it could be Samsung, or it could be Apple TV, Fire Stick, Chromecast, or it could be Xbox or PlayStation. Those are different devices, different IDs, but they're still on the same IP address.
Yep. And maybe we'll talk about that a little bit. Is the different types of targeting. We've thrown out some of these terms. Collectively, there's a term called MAIDs, which is Mobile Advertiser ID. You may have heard things like Google Advertiser ID or IDFA. Those all kind of fall under that, which is it's an identifier that lives on the device. It's just a big long string of characters. It's not necessarily tied to an individual. But the way that the advertising ecosystem works is it's all happening on an auction, kind of like the stock market. So when we are buying media on behalf of our advertisers, we are looking for specific auctions that we want to participate in, right? There's, I don't know, 1 trillion auctions every day in the US or more. There's a lot of them. Even in any given market, there's going to be millions every day, right? And so when we talk about targeting a specific device based on where it's been in the past, because we have that device ID that we saw in a dispensary or at a concert or wherever it is, we basically put that in as a filter, right? So here's all of the impressions that are available to bid on. we are only going to bid on impressions that match this specific set of identifiers, whether that is a mobile ad ID or a household IP address, or an IP address that's associated with the specific device that belongs to an individual. And there's a lot of detail to that we could spend hours on, but at a high
Yeah.
level,
It does, like, it is a good point too, especially for, people probably listening to this and, in cannabis is, what I've seen in my time in it and, being, having experience in that and now in here is that a lot of it comes with a couple of things I've heard a lot where it's kind of, gotcha buying, because companies will share a ton of this data and show, but they might not necessarily use that, unless you're sophisticated and are looking at, the bid logs and at like those reports coming to you. But, the gotcha targeting too, is, detrimental to like what the overall strategy is. And the gotcha marketing is that like, I want it around this radius and these people that do this, they have to be this type of person. I want to know how many are in this area based on purchase, like, and it's, while it's as much of like, I want you to prove that like these are the right people and everything, because obviously you have 280E, like it has to perform. You can't just say like, yeah, like I just hope everybody is an engineer one day, and then, oh yeah, here's our brand. Like, yeah, it has to be performance driven and driving sales, but you don't want that to get into the way of making it successful and how everything else, works in conjunction with each other. So if you're looking at the content and you're like, I want it to run on these sites and this on this site list, but I want it to be this person and that, one, it does compound the price, and whoever you're working with, it does severely hinder their ability to make it successful. Because then the next conversation is like, well, I wasn't successful. And it's like, well, I mean, because of this. And, each different tactic or strategy need to all be somewhat working together. So if it's a data-driven strategy and you want to go after this type of person and stuff, like you'd be very surprised that they might not read the stuff that you think that they read because you don't know everything about them. But if you want it to be a contextual strategy, that's, that needs to be a standalone, and you can get creative with who that is, which tying that back into geo data, you can start with contextual people that are reading music websites, and maybe they go to a concert. You look at the concert venues around the cities. If it's New York, they've been to, their device has always been at Terminal 5 and things. They're searching, they're reading that type of content, and you see those devices across those IDs coming up, and maybe they've been to the concert in the past, and that they go to Coachella, they go to Electric Force, they go to, Firefly or something like that. But, if that's your audience, you're building that model from them and the content that they read, and you're sliding your creative, your brand, your retailer into that, to speak to that community, to be a part of that community, to where it doesn't feel as much of like a, hey, this is a buy this, that your brand and everything is part of the culture, and that's something that's so important in cannabis too, because one, on a retail level, these dispensaries are part of the community, and two, the brands, are trying to build brand loyalty while not being able to do brand loyalty or awareness types of marketing. So that's a good way to do it by, serving and segmenting those based on those, consumers' habits and stuff, because you align with the types of affinities that they're into.
Yeah. Following up on that, that is something that we've run into with some marketers where they get very hyper focused on doing only one thing, right? Like I only want to serve ads to my competitors' customers, and that is a great tactic, but it needs to be part of like an integrated plan of, okay, yes, here's a conquest campaign. It's built up of the dispensary visitors of your competitors around you. That's going to be one tactic. But we also want to do prospecting, right? We also want to reach the rest of the market. And then you need to decide, how prescriptive you want to be in targeting those people. But what you said earlier is another thing we've run into is where are the ads running, right? And sometimes people get hung up on, oh, I only want my ads to be on this top news site in the area. But the reality is that's a great place to be, but those don't actually tend to convert very well. What converts well, and it is geographically dependent, depending like whether in New York or LA or whatever, are people playing games on their phone, right? These are people that are in they're in a more receptive state generally than when they're reading the news, right?
Yeah, New York is a perfect example of that, where during the day you have, and I said this on a call earlier today, where you have 16, million people there on that island during working hours. But at night, it's drops like 50% because everybody's commuting in. It's such a big commuter city, but it has established public transit. And it goes into why I don't believe in last click attribution as like a key metric, and more on the ROAS or the influence sales, because those commuters are coming in and you're like, yeah, I want it to be on this. Like, they're a business professional. They read this on the way to work. They're dedicated. No, they're not. They're playing Wordle and Words with Friends and stuff. Like, they're just as miserable as everybody else. So they're, reading that stuff, or they're reading about, in New York, how the Jets suck or something. Like, they're reading that sports stuff. They're not going to immediately see your ad and go, oh my God, I got to buy this. Like
Yeah.
they're going to go back to it later on, and then you can follow up maybe with their other devices. While you see them log in email base wise, that's their work computer, or they're at home. And especially in the East Coast, which poses a whole different complex, like just industry for cannabis on its own, with how close these states are. You have Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey. You can be from Boston to DC in 5.5, 6 hours. Like, they're that close, and you go through 5 or 6 of the big cities, and even across all those different states, like, they're all different types of products and stuff. But you have to remember that I live by train 50 minutes outside of Manhattan, and made the commute for 10 plus years. And the brands that I can get in the city are different than the brands that I can get out here. Even with sports gambling, which is, regulated industry, you can deposit money in different ways in New York City than you can in New York, even though from the physical border, I'm 5 minutes away. But if there's a brand that I like that is in New York, I'll buy that, and then I'll just hop on the train and ride out. So, you do have to take into that account. So if you're looking at the devices that are there on the island during the day, and then where they go afterwards, you can segment by, the Connecticut brands, where you got CT Pharma, Curaleaf is here, NGO, and then you have New Jersey as well. They sparse out that way, but you don't want a Connecticut brand targeting the consumers that are then going to New Jersey.
Yeah. And that's an example of another way that you can use geography that we've done many times, which is, okay, these are people that live in this area, but there's a cohort of those people that drive in between these two cities on a regular basis, right? And so that's an example of where, okay, I am in San Francisco. Well, I'm not. I'm outside. That's a good example. I'm not in San Francisco, right? But I did, like you. I worked in San Francisco for many years. I took the train in. Then you can start to say, okay, yeah, I want to serve ads to people you would think only just that live around your location in San Francisco. But there's another group of people that are coming into the city every day, and they're going to be near you. And that's another group that you want to target, right? So you can get creative about how you build your geographic audiences and how you serve them.
Yeah, yeah. And it's difficult with, event-based targeting, because somebody that goes to Coachella one year, they might not go the next year. But they can still tell you that that was somebody that was interested in music. But where you can use it is a look back for key summer vacation areas. People that might not be in rec states, but travel to a rec state, like you were saying before with Las Vegas. But you can look at those vacation areas. I mean, you have a lot of the Midwestern states around, let's say, like a Missouri, where people are going to the Ozarks, but they're coming from Iowa or Nebraska or other places. They're driving there. You might want to look at those devices that were in one area or another, because that that's where they vacation. So that's something that they want to do. So you want to serve them those ads, or know when those devices are within that area and they pop up, that is an impression and a consumer that I do want to reach.
Yeah. The other thing you can do with geography, and this is, you see a lot of people that don't work in advertising, and they see this behavior of like, oh, I talked about this thing and then I got an ad for it, right? And they're, people are convinced their phones are listening to them, and maybe they are, maybe they're not. As far as I haven't actually ever seen any facts around that,
Yeah, and also what, we've been on a lot of these before. And my perfect example of the Aunt Carol, speech and stuff is that it's like, look, like, your device is in your home, like, yeah, it might be listed and stuff, but like that's a lot of data, and data storage is not free. So like, even though you're a big company like Amazon, storing everything that everybody said and all that one time, like that's
Yeah.
too expensive.
But I
So,
mean, what I was going to give you is an example of tactics we've used that would make people think that is happening, right?
mm,
So, because you can see how devices dwell together, so you can create an audience of, okay, these are, um, this is my target group of people, and we've done this for like concert, like Live Nation, right? Like concert campaigns, where it's we want to target the friends of the people we've already identified, right? So we know that these people are interested in this particular band, and we want to serve them ads, but we actually also want to serve their friends ads. And because people that spend time together, their phones can be associated with each other, that's when you start to see things where it's like, oh, your friend went to this concert and then you got an ad for a similar band for a concert that's coming up. And that's because location information is being used. And it's being used to say that these are devices that went to a concert and these are the friends' devices, and we want to serve them ads also. Because if you can get anyone in the friend group to want to go to the concert, the likelihood that the rest of the friend group is going to go increases a lot.
yeah, yeah, and with anything with geodata, and I know, and we've talked about this a lot, is that it is becoming harder to where Apple has made it difficult because you can opt out of tracking. So it's not a complete science anymore, but it doesn't mean that it's not usable. It just needs to be put into a different type of data model to where you can aggregate it up to a more probabilistic number of what either walk-ins or this location is, where you might only capture 5-10%, but you can still use that data to and aggregate it up to get a better more probabilistic figure and stuff. It's just an education point. It's not a perfect science. It goes back to the seed got you, I only got 5 walk-ins. Well, it's like, yeah, because cannabis consumers aren't just like, yeah, idiots. Like I've said this before, is that the like one of the highest purchaser classes is of a certain age, maybe that millennial range, but they have on the majority a higher household income. But it doesn't make them frivolous with their discretionary income. They're deal shoppers. They're smart shoppers, smart investors. And each category of those is different. But as targeting like the real time and stuff where it's starting to become more difficult, you need to remember that it's on a model and how it works for everything else. And with the phones listening, or how does it know? It's like the example I always give is, Shazam, where it's like, they don't make money by you being in a bar with all of your buddies holding your phone up and being like, see, I told you, it's Katy Perry. Like it's
Is that a
pinging.
personal story?
Huh? No, maybe. It's it's pinging where that is because you opened it and you activated it for that location. So these are things that are running, in the background. And we talked about, mobile device IDs and stuff. So IPs can, change. Cookies, like, yes, they're going away. And that's kind of what the general public always hears about, but it's a couple clicks to wipe those clean. But what doesn't change, or Apple would probably like it to change, and they do a good job of making it change every 2 years. But your phone's, ID that it signals doesn't change the most. So that's why it's like the best way of targeting. Same with, email addresses as well. Like, have you ever thought about changing your email address right now? It'd be like changing your phone number. You're like, how many people you got to text and call? Like, it's a huge process.
Yeah.
So one of the more consistent things is mobile device IDs, and what that does unlock is all of the geospatial geo-targeting tools that you can use, and you should use them in creative ways.
Yeah. That is something we didn't touch on. All the things that we've been talking about today have nothing to do with cookies, right? So the cookie apocalypse is upon us in various ways, but it doesn't play into any of this at all. When you're doing geographic based behavior, it's anonymized. It's anonymized in the sense that you don't know who the people are that you're advertising to. So it's not PII, it's not personally identifiable information. But it is more deterministic, like a cookie would have been, but without having to worry about, cookies going away.
Yeah, it's something that can be, called upon, to the advertisers, the brands, the retailers to just be, more creative with, what they want to do. And unfortunately, in cannabis, it's the need to be more creative with less, because of, a lot of the, handicaps that the industry as a whole have.
Yeah.
So you still want to drive innovation and creative ways to reach consumers, um, but spending the time and working on the strategy of how all these can work together and some of the things that are within your control, taking advantage more of those. It's the same of, getting these people once you get them on the site, it's basically like they're in your shop. So you can focus on the education. You need to lead them in, and you need to lead them in because they're interested in your brand for either a reason, or you've shown them creative to build that loyalty to get them in. And to get those right people in, that's where you can use the tactic of everything in Geo that tells you a story of why this person would be an ideal customer for you.
Yeah. All right, we're coming up on time here. I wanted if anyone wants to ask questions at this point, there is a Q&A section, so feel free to post a question if you have one. Otherwise, what I'm going to do is kind of try to wrap up and summarize some of the many different things we've been talking about. So Geo, you can use consumers' past geography and their behavior to target them in the present. You also have the ability to take any data that you may have, consumer data like email addresses or physical addresses from your existing customer base, translate that into those same identifiers. And you can also, we didn't talk about this too much today, but you can also measure the devices that you served ads to and whether or not they walked into your physical locations in the future after they've seen the ads. Ted, do you want to add some bits to that?
Yeah, I think, in summary, it's not using any of this geo types of targeting as like the end all be all, but how it plays into the rest of the messaging that you're doing, because it can become such a, important ingredient. So, we touched on it at the end, but it's important to know that the identifiers and where we're getting it or anybody else is getting this data is still, available. It's if you're making a recipe and you remove one ingredient, which would be cookies in this case, because maybe over time you've, developed an allergy to it or something, you can find a replacement that still makes the overall, end result or whatever it is that you're cooking still taste, great. So, it's understanding how this can all be used, looking at it from, depending on the size of your business, but looking at it from a macro and a micro level, how it fits into everything else and using it wisely.
Great. Well, Ted, I appreciate your time today. If anyone has questions about geo-targeting, digital campaigns, performance marketing, feel free to reach out to either of us. It's ted@mediajel.com or jake@mediajel.com. And I'd like to thank everyone for their time today. And this has been another episode of Cannabis Marketing Live. Thanks, Ted.
All right, I'll get back to work.
All right. Yeah, perfect.